So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session. We're grateful that you are joining us today. I'm Allison Reed here at the Bishop's office, and we're delighted you're here. I've got a few words of introduction before we begin. This is the second session of our three-part workshop, a series for wardens and treasurers and vestries. And we'll be recording all of these sessions and adding them to our website so you can use them for your trainings or in any way that you'd like. We hope this will be a good tool for you going forward. We hope the series will equip your vestry with tools and techniques for effective leadership. And to that end, we're looking at roles and responsibilities. We're looking at ways to enrich your dialogue through more effective agendas and discussions, and methods, of course, to ensure your long-term financial stability and avoid trouble spots, stop fraud before it starts, and lots more. And in today's session, we're continuing with maximizing your impact. And we're delighted to welcome the Reverend Rob Courtney to lead our session. And as many of you know, Father Rob is rector at St. Paul's Episcopal Church and School here in New Orleans. And he also serves as the current chair of the Godet Fund Committee, which administers grants and scholarships benefiting African American students throughout our diocese. He has served as president of the Diocesan Standing Committee. He has been a member of the Diocesan Executive Board, the Committee on Racial Reconciliation, and has also served as Dean of the Southwest Deanery. And then in his spare time, Father Rob also leads pilgrimages to the Holy Land for members of churches all around their diet. So we're grateful. I'm sorry, I'm a little echo again. Apologies. We're grateful to have Father Rob be part of our series and be here today to share his experience and perspective with us. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Allison. Really appreciate the invitation. Well, let us pray. Direct us, O Lord, in all our doings with your most gracious favor, and further us with your continual help, that in all our works, begun, continued, and ended in you, we may glorify your name, and finally, by your mercy, obtain everlasting life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Now, I'll give you a great hint. This prayer that I just used is the prayer for guidance in the prayer book. There are actually two prayers for guidance. This was the first one. It's on page 832 of the prayer book. If you're ever caught in a meeting or some situation where you're asked to pray, this is a great option. It will work in just about any circumstance. It's one of a few prayers that I have memorized, so I recommend memorizing it, because especially if you're a senior warden and maybe your rector isn't present and you're asked to pray at the beginning of a vestry meeting, it's a great one to pray. It's an easy one to remember too. And if you ever get caught flat-footed being asked to pray and you don't know what to say, it's a great option. So, as Allison said, we are going to talk today about roles and responsibilities and a little bit about how we can maximize our impact as wardens or treasurers or vestry members of any kind. And also how we can be more supportive of and more collaborative with our clergy and with the other people that we work with on the vestry. And to do that, we're going to talk about a baptismal model of vestry. But I want to start by sharing a quotation from an anonymous source. I don't remember who said this. I remember hearing it at a consortium of endowed Episcopal parishes meeting in a parish administrators conference years ago. That somebody said, the church is not a business, but it must often behave like one. The church is not a business, but it must often behave like one. And so if you are involved in a business of your own, if you're on the board of some kind of organization in the community, it may not be quite the same as being part of a church. Being part of a church is unique. because it's not a business. But as we all know, sometimes it does have to behave like one. And it makes me wonder that sometimes, why do we behave differently at work than we do at church? And vice versa. Why do sometimes we behave differently at church than we do to work? We have a real tendency of compartmentalizing our spirituality and not bringing it with us outside of the doors of the church, especially if we are in a quote unquote business setting. And then sometimes if we do have a lot of familiarity with business, we'll come into the church and maybe believe that because we have a lot of knowledge, a lot of know-how, that we can fix everything. But beware of doing that. Beware of thinking that you're going to fix everything right away. It's certainly a good thing to ask questions and bring our expertise, because that's how we learn and grow. That's how the organization learns and grows. But we don't want to be overbearing either. And then we also don't want to think, well, this is too holy for, things that we might do at work, for business practices. It's a strange kind of dance. So I want to look at a couple of scripture passages that shows this mix of being organized, being leaders, and being in a spiritual context. So you might be familiar with this story from Exodus 18 of Moses learning to share the burden of leadership, because sometimes we all have to learn to share the burden of leadership and learn we cannot do it all ourselves. So in Exodus 18, it says, Moses sat as a judge for the people while the people stood around Moses from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What's this that you're doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people are standing around you from morning until evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When a conflict arises between them, they come to me and I judge between the two of them. I also teach them God's regulations and instructions." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing isn't good. You will end up totally wearing yourself out, both you and these people who are with you. The work is too difficult for you. You can't do it alone. Now listen to me and let me give you some advice, and may God be with you. Your role should be to represent the people before God. You should bring their disputes before God yourself. Explain the regulations and instructions to them. Let them know the way they're supposed to go and the things they're supposed to do. But you should also look among all the people for capable persons who respect God. They should be trustworthy and not corrupt. Set these persons over the people as officers of groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at all times. They should bring every major dispute to you, but they should decide all the minor cases themselves. This will work much easier for you, and they will share your load. If you do this and God directs you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will be able to go back to their homes much happier." Moses listened to his father-in-law's suggestions and did everything that he said. Moses chose capable persons from all Israel and set them as leaders over the people, as officers over groups of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They act as judges for people at all times. They would refer the hard cases to Moses, but all the minor cases they decided themselves. Then Moses said goodbye to his father-in-law, Jethro, and went back to his own country. I think this is an important lesson for a number of reasons. One teaches us that we can't do everything by ourselves. Even one of the great patriarchs of the faith, Moses, could not do everything by himself, and he had to learn this because he had a tendency to wear himself out. Whether we're clergy or lay people, I think we all have the same kind of tendency. There's a similar example in Acts 6, where the 12 apostles share the burden of leadership with people who we traditionally now think of as the first deacons, Stephen and 6 other men who were appointed to help share some of the responsibilities, because it was a lot of work for the original 12 trying to manage the original group of disciples after Jesus's ascension. And Jesus himself shows us about sharing this load because he had disciples, he had apostles who went out on mission for him. There are stories in the Gospels of him sending out 70 disciples to go and do his mission work. So even Jesus knew you can't do all this by yourself. And then, of course, there's the famous passage that many of us know from 1 Corinthians 12, where Paul talks about spiritual gifts and offers us some pretty important insights. So in 1 Corinthians 12, let me read this to you. There are different spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit, and there are different ministries in the same Lord, and there are different activities, but the same God who produces all of them in everyone. A demonstration of the Spirit is given to each person for the common good. A word of wisdom is given by the Spirit to one person, a word of knowledge to another according to the same Spirit, faith still to another by the same Spirit, gifts of healing to another in the one Spirit, performance of miracles to another, prophecy to another, the ability to tell spirits apart to another, different kinds of tongues to another, the interpretation of tongues to another. All these things are produced by the one and same Spirit who gives what he wants to each person. And he goes on to say, in the church, God has appointed first apostles, and prophets, and teachers, and then miracles, then gifts of healing, the ability to help others, leadership skills, different kinds of tongues. They are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, do all perform miracles, do all have gifts of healing. All don't speak in different tongues, do they? All don't interpret, do they? Use your ambition to try to get the greater gifts, and I'm going to show you an even better way. So Paul reminds us that everybody's got different skills. Everybody's got different gifts. And the only difference, by the way, between your natural talents, whatever they may be, and a spiritual gift is conversion, is you beginning to see your gift, whatever it is that you have a talent for, whatever you have knowledge and skill in, is beginning to see it as a spiritual gift, is beginning to see it as something that you can use for ministry, whether it's in church or whether it's at work, which we don't have to think of as different spheres of our life. So to go back a little bit to maybe some things that you might have heard last week from Alan Brackett to refresh our memories, the vestry are lay leadership of the church, empowered to act as trustees of the parish in all matters concerning its corporate property and the relation of the parish to its clergy. The primary responsibilities of these leaders are to administer the temporal affairs of the parish, elect and call the rector, and properly maintain the church and all other buildings and grounds belonging to the parish. So that's the basic job of a vestry. The vestry members are all fiduciaries, and a fiduciary is someone who has responsibility. So a vestry member's fiduciary responsibility means the trust and confidence placed in a person's ability to conduct public affairs for the church for the common good according to one's conscience. Now, there's a wonderful quotation from John Westerhoff, who was an Episcopal priest and who wrote a book called A People Called Episcopalians. And he writes something about what it means to be part of a group of leaders that I think is extremely important. He says, persons elected to an office or to a representative body are never sent to a meeting to represent, defend, or vote for a position established by those who elect them or the group they are to represent. Persons are to be elected because it is believed that they can think for themselves and deal openly with complex matters. They are also to be spiritually mature enough to listen for the leading of the Spirit so as to be free to vote their conscience. No proxy votes are acceptable. Decisions must be reached by those who have been party to the conversation and prayer of the body called upon to consider a matter of concern. So I love that line of persons are to be elected because it's believed they can think for themselves and deal openly with complex matters. I would actually love to send a copy of this quotation to every member of Congress. I think maybe they all need to hear it. I don't think they would listen to it, but I think they all need to hear it. I think we as vestry members need to hear it for sure. So to become a vestry member, we know there are certain canonical requirements. All vestry members have to be confirmed communicants in good standing, which means you've been baptized, you've received Holy Communion at least 3 times during the preceding year, you've been confirmed or received into the communion of the Episcopal Church by the laying on of hands by a bishop, you've been faithful in corporate worship during the preceding year, you're at least 18, because we are dealing with legal matters, so minors can't be official members of vestries. You have to be a member of the parish for at least 6 months, which is one good reason why you don't run after people as soon as they walk in the door and beg them to be on the vestry. We have to give people a little bit of time to learn about our community and give them a chance for some leadership development. They have to be financial contributors of record to the parish during the preceding 6 months. And they have been, as the canons of the church say, faithful in working, praying, and giving for the spread of the kingdom of God. So those are the requirements. But We also list at St. Paul's some expectations, and I think these could apply to any parish, but these are the expectations that we try to set for people who are members of our vestry. Being faithful in attendance at corporate worship should be a no-brainer. Being faithful in attendance at vestry meetings, being among the first each year to turn in a financial commitment card, being present at major church and school events, because we have a school here, being faithful in daily prayer, praying particularly for God's guidance and understanding that their spirituality informs their fiduciary responsibility to the parish. So again, not separating matter and spirit here. That's not what the good news teaches us. Matter and spirit are one thing together. They are aware of and being involved in parish Christian education programs, fellowship, and service opportunities. They work cooperatively with clergy, staff, school board of trustees, and other lay people in the St. Paul's community to form an environment of mutual respect and trust. They are being open and welcoming to all people and being at the forefront of showing hospitality to newcomers. And they are understanding that they're called to active leadership in the parish, even when their term on the vestry ends. As an example, I saw that on this call today is our own Eston Payne from St. Paul's. He's not a member of our vestry anymore, but he's still an active leader in our parish, and he's still here growing and learning. So we're glad he's here. So again, you as a vestry member, you really only have three main responsibilities. One is a responsibility for the property of the parish, for the finances of the parish, and for the parish's relationship to the clergy. When it comes to the canons, that's it. That is all it says about what it means to be a vestry member and managing the parish's temporal affairs, property, finances, and relationship to the clergy. And I want to note that something that's not there. It doesn't say anything about our parish programming. It doesn't say anything about the liturgy. That is really the responsibility of the clergy and the staff of the parish. So the role of a vestry is much bigger picture. Now, I think you can be very helpful to your clergy person in a lot of ways if you remind them this. And for example, sometimes I will hear colleagues tell a story like, yeah, I really wanted to do a Wednesday night Bible study, but I talked to the vestry about it, and they said that they didn't want to do that because they tried it in the past and it didn't work. And so we're not going to do it. And I always ask them, why did you ask them about doing a Bible study? It's certainly appropriate, and I certainly talk to my vestry about different programming things I'm going to do, but they understand that it's not so much about their permission to do it. And they might say, well, we've tried something like that before and it didn't really work, but hey, give it a shot. The only real reason that I would need to talk to my vestry about, say, a Wednesday night program is like at our Wednesday night program, we offer food and we have to pay for the food. So if I want there to be food that's paid for by the parish, then I have to get the vestry's approval to add that into the budget so that it will be there. So that's really the question that a vestry would answer. If I need to hire a new staff member, as long as there's funding to do it, then I should be able to do that. But I have to talk to the vestry about it and get their approval for the funding. So I think it's really good that we understand what our roles are. So we're letting everybody exercise their own gifts. And we're going to get more into that here as we keep going. So there are 4 officers on a vestry. There's the senior warden, who in some ways is like the ecclesiastical authority of the parish in the absence of the rector. So, if the rector signs all contracts for the parish and the rector's not around, well, the senior warden would do that work. Then there's the junior warden, and in many parishes, the junior warden is responsible for property, but know that that's merely a tradition. It's not something that has to be. Right now, my junior warden is the leader of our buildings and property team, but in the past, I've had junior wardens who didn't do that work at all, and have even had people who were not vestry members who were kind of the chair of our buildings and property team, which I'll say more about too. So you don't have to attach property to the junior warden necessarily. The treasurer in most places can either be or not be a member of the vestry. We have a treasurer we've had for several years now, and he's flip-flopped a little. He is a current vestry member now, but he just joined again since a gap year that he took because he had to according to our bylaws. And then you have a secretary or clerk is actually the language we use around here. And the clerk, takes minutes at the meeting and is responsible for being sort of the registrar of the parish. So when we get to our annual meeting every year, the clerk should have a list of all the people who are qualified to vote in the annual meeting and be able to share that with everybody. So a baptismal model of church. Now, you probably, if you've been around long enough to remember the 1928 prayer book, you no doubt remember that there was a lot of controversy when we switched from the 28 prayer book to what people still call, even though it was in 1979, the new prayer book. When that switch happened, there was a lot of controversy, some of which was maybe simply around language, of people really enjoying the old Elizabethan language, which we have retained in the Rite One liturgies. But it was more than just a shift in language. It was a huge shift in our theological standpoint. So in 1928, the ecclesiology of the church was very focused around priests. It was very much a clericalist ecclesiology. Father knows best. The priest sort of did and was the source of all knowledge for everything. However, in the 1979 prayer book, the ecclesiology or structure of the church is a baptismal ecclesiology. Everything is focused around baptism and our ministry as baptized people. It recognizes very clearly that we have different spiritual gifts. Some of us are called to ordained roles and some of us are not. But if you look in the catechism in the back of the prayer book on page 855, you will see that laity are listed as an order of ministry. Who are the ministers of the church? It asks. The ministers of the church are laypersons who are mentioned first, bishops, priests, and deacons. So you are a minister of the church. And in fact, every one of the subsequent descriptions of the orders of ministry start the same way. The ministry of lay persons is to represent Christ in his church. And then it goes on. The ministry of a bishop is to represent Christ in his church. And it goes on. The ministry of a priest is to represent Christ in his church. The ministry of a deacon is to represent Christ in his church. But we all do that in different ways. But you very much are a minister of the church. And if you really pay attention to this idea, notice it now, you'll notice how central baptism is to everything we do, even the way the prayer book itself is arranged. The Holy Week proper liturgies include the Great Vigil of Easter, which is the very center of the Christian year, and it's a baptismal feast. This Sunday, you may have baptisms in your church on the Feast of Pentecost. We'll all renew our baptismal covenant together, every one of us. That details our responsibilities. But we are ministers of the church, whether we're ordained or whether we are a member of the laity. And so if you begin to think about your ministry, or will think of yourself as a minister and begin to think about your life, anything you do in the life of the church, even as a vestry member, as a ministry, things start to look a little different. Bishop Claude Payne, is a retired bishop of Texas, in a wonderful book that I highly recommend called Reclaiming Christianity, he says church boards, if they're organized appropriately and if they view themselves appropriately, can be centers of Christian renewal. I wonder if you've ever thought about the vestry at your church as a center of Christian renewal. I know sometimes in the past at our church, it's been a struggle to get vestry members because people are like, oh, I don't know if I want to do that. I don't know if I want to see how the sausage is made, or maybe they've done it in the past and they're like, oh no. But I'm pleased to say that now when people leave our vestry, they leave with a pretty positive picture of what it can mean to be on the vestry and what they can contribute to the life of the church. When vestries are organized as a committee of the whole, Bishop Payne says, vestry meetings can be deadly and boring, and they can be. Every member feels compelled to contribute, usually having to pick something to question, taking precious time from others. And I know that you've experienced this before, where maybe you feel a sense of anxiety in a meeting because you're not really sure what you are or are not supposed to be contributing. Are you supposed to know more about this financial report that you're looking at that's making your eyes glaze over and you don't really understand? Sometimes we get in these meetings and we feel like we have to be, jack of all trades. The truth is we're master of none, and we're a little bit lost. It doesn't have to be that way. So what Bishop Payne proposes and what we do here at St. Paul's, well, he proposes that vestries be made up of 3 committees: a property committee, an administration committee, and a ministry committee. Now, there's a couple things about this that I'm not, I love his structure, but I don't like his language. I don't like that he calls one committee ministry, because as we've been talking about, all this stuff is ministry, every bit of it. Even if you're dealing with the property, even if you're the treasurer of the parish, what you're doing is ministry. In fact, the word administration has the word ministry in it. It means before ministry. It means these are the things that enable ministry to happen. So sometimes the things we work on in vestry may not be sexy exactly, but we know they enable ministry to happen. Fixing the air conditioner, not terribly exciting. And we don't really want to spend the money on it. But I can tell you what, when people show up on Sunday morning and it's nice and cool in the church in July, everybody appreciates it. It truly is a ministry. And you will know that if the air conditioner is not working. So what we do is we do something a little different. And maybe you can say this is cheesy of me, but I don't like the word committee either. I don't think anybody really wants to serve on a committee. I'm not terribly crazy about serving on committees. But teams feels different to me. You know, maybe it's semantics, but it works better for me. So we talk about ours as teams. We name them slightly differently. So we have a buildings and property team, we have a finance and administration team, and we have an outreach and connection team. And we actually really have 4 teams, because the officers of the vestry, the senior warden, junior warden, treasurer, and clerk, act as an executive team that we have to meet together about higher level stuff sometimes, maybe before it goes to the full vestry. So, but even those executive team members serve on one of these other teams, according to whatever their particular gifts are. And these teams meet whenever is necessary apart from the entire vestry. So for example, I'd say probably our most functional team right now is our finance and administration team. And our treasurer, Ryan Kelly, is an incredibly organized guy. And I know the meeting dates for the finance and administration team for the rest of the year. They are already on my calendar. He's got an agenda for every one of these meetings that are based on different benchmarks that we have to meet during the year around church budget, school budget, and other things. So there are certain things at each quarter that when we meet that we have to accomplish in those meetings, plus things that come up along the way that need to be addressed in the moment. Our buildings and property team meets really almost monthly right now, but they meet outside of the vestry. And then recommendations are brought to the entire vestry if and when approval is needed. If and when approval is needed. So when we approve our budget, you know, it starts usually here in the offices with me and the treasurer, and maybe a couple of people from the finance team, and we work out the budget. Then it goes to the finance and administration team, and then they will make a recommendation to the vestry to pass or not to pass. Now, of course, everybody's given an opportunity to ask questions, to offer input, but generally, once it's been through all those steps, and once the committee makes a recommendation, the vestry generally accepts whatever that recommendation is, whether it's coming from finance, whether it's coming from property. If they're the people who know what they're doing. So we let them do their job and we use their expertise, and we don't have to pretend that we know what we're talking about when we don't. I know just enough about accounting and finance to be dangerous. But I really depend on my treasurer and other experts who are on our team to let me know what the best course of action is. I really fundamentally believe you hire the right people and you let them do their job. Just as you would if you have your own business, you'd hire the right people and trust them to do their job, trust their input about it. I think we need to do the same thing in our vestries. Let's put people in charge of different portions of our work who really know what they're doing, and then really trust their input. And I would encourage you too to consider non-vestry members for your teams. Our property team has non-vestry members on it. Our finance and administration team has non-vestry members on it. And actually, we always try to include somebody from our school board, because I and my treasurer and senior warden serve on the finance committee for the school. So we're around when they're working on their budget. And you know, we have somebody from them, so they understand what's going on when we're working on our budget as well. So there's lots of transparency involved too. It's a great opportunity for leadership development. And we actually need to do this. We don't have a vestry ambassador at the moment, but should probably appoint one at our next meeting. But what our vestry ambassador does is we will sometimes have discussions and identify people that we think might be good future vestry members. But, maybe they're newer and we don't really feel like they're quite ready yet, but we want to give them an idea that this is something they could do, and we want to give them a chance to see how the vestry works. So the vestry ambassador will go and talk to these folks and invite them to a vestry meeting, and they'll come and observe the meeting. And we will also have them tell us a little bit about themselves, about how they got to St. Paul's, about what St. Paul's means to them. So there's a connection too for the vestry with the parish, to remember that we are doing this on behalf of people who have elected us in the parish, and that this is the people that our work affects. So it's a good two-way street. So think about maybe having a vestry ambassador to help identify some potential future leaders in your church. When we do our meetings, the rector remains the canonical chair of the meeting, but the administration of the meeting, I delegate it to the senior warden. And this frees me up to devote more time to strategic and missionary stuff. And it empowers the senior warden to exercise some leadership. And, some people are very natural at this, but I've had other senior wardens who maybe before they got on vestry didn't necessarily see themselves as leaders, but it gives them a chance to exercise some leadership and begin to show gifts that they didn't even realize they had in the first place. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and then share something else with you. This is a sample agenda. Hold on just one second. Make sure I've got this pulled up correctly. Here we go. So our agenda is pretty much the same every meeting. So this is one from September of last year. So I always start with a prayer and reflection, and sometimes it's as simple as just a prayer and a few moments of silence. I might ask a question during our reflection time for people to share on. I did a presentation this time about an article I read called "Is the Church Dying? Does it Need to?" We talked about it a little during our reflection. Our senior warden will then help us go through our mission, vision, and guiding principles, and then we approve our minutes, and then we'll have breakout sessions. So people, and we don't always do this. We go through seasons where we'll do it and then seasons where we won't. I prefer when we do it, but we break out into teams for no more than 15 minutes to talk about anything that maybe wasn't covered in a meeting, something that's come up at the last minute, or something we need to get, they need to get in line before they come and present to the whole vestry. And then we'll go through our reports, and it's kind of always the same order. Our head of school makes a report. She attends our vestry members as somebody with voice but no vote. We hear buildings and property. We hear from outreach and connection, from finance and administration. Our senior warden may have something to report, and then we report as clergy at the end if we have anything we want everybody to know. And we will adjourn, and sometimes we'll actually stick around for a little while, especially maybe if we're celebrating something for somebody. If they have a birthday or something, sometimes we'll have a cake or whatever and visit with each other for a little while, and then we head off. But our agenda is almost always just like this. You'll see this meeting, I think, ended up being 75 minutes. We've had some longer than 90-minute meetings, depending on what kind of thing is going on. But most of the time, our meeting is not more than 90 minutes. And it wouldn't even be that long if we weren't adding a reflection at the beginning. But I think this is important because it gives a chance for some visioning on my part. And it gives a chance for people to see this as not just a business exercise, but a spiritual exercise. And I honestly think of our vestry as a small group, more than just some sort of business committee. I think it is a small group. So that's what the agenda looks like. And by the way, this PowerPoint and that agenda, Hannah Reed will have. So if you want to email her, she can send it to you for you to look at in more detail. With regard to the breakout meetings, what if there's nothing to break out about? Well, I like to break out anyway to give people to reconnect on anything that may be on the report if they need to. And if nothing else, they can just catch up with each other personally. Because again, this is not just about us doing some business. there's more to it than that. And especially if we think of each other as members of a small group. So there's a chance for some peer engagement, for some trust building. But sometimes you'll have some business things you actually need to go over. But I think it's an important part of the meeting. We try to distribute reports ahead of time, especially the financial report, so that people have a chance to look at it. And we ask people to read it ahead of time and direct questions in advance to the person who's responsible for it. I think this is really important around finances. Sometimes people will have questions about the report that's really just something for their own clarification that wouldn't necessarily be edifying to the whole group. Yet sometimes they may ask a question that might be important for everybody to know. And so the treasurer, for instance, will make note of that with them, and the question will come up again in the main meeting, so everybody can have a chance to talk about it. But, a lot of times questions that get asked are really just clarifying questions that you can ask ahead of time, and you don't have to take up time in the meeting to do. And Bishop Payne suggests streamlining the process by mutually consenting to a financial sheet distribution only once quarterly. Now, we do look at ours every month. And I would say that here at St. Paul's, thanks be to God, there's not a tremendous amount of anxiety around money at this point in our history. So it's not a big deal. We could go to a quarterly thing if we wanted to, but either way, people wouldn't have much anxiety about it. But I would say that if you do have a vestry that is very anxious about money, it could be beneficial to maybe not obsess over the financial report every month, that you might think about looking at it quarterly. So people aren't perseverating on, worry about the finances, and recognize that the work you do is broader in scope together than that. You might also consider incorporating a team structure like this into development of the annual budget, because you can get, mini or ministry area budget proposals, and then take that to the finance and administration team as part of the larger budgeting process, that they can recommend to the rest of the vestry. And then another thing I recommend doing is enshrining all your canons, your articles, your bylaws, and your policies into one document. We have a document. I have not shared this with Canon Reed because it's super long. Ours is like 55 pages long. But if you want to see ours, I'm happy to share it with you, so you can let either one of us know, and I'll make sure you get a copy. But to show you right quick, very briefly, what this thing looks like, if I can find it and pull it up for you. Let's see. Hold on just a second. Try that again. Okay, so what, if you've ever tried to look up a particular canon or bylaw or anything, you'll know that sometimes it can be confusing. Like, where is that? Where is that listed? I have no idea. So what we've done is we compiled all the important stuff into one document that is under headings, and then it's footnoted so you know what the source material is. So at the beginning of ours, we have a whole history of our church listed for people to read, and our mission and guiding principles and all that stuff. But, for instance, this stuff about the parish corporation, a lot of this stuff is in different places. It's not all in the same document. So I've got it footnoted here at the bottom where you can find it. Some of it's in the Adola canons. Some of it's in our articles and incorporations. Some of it is in the national canons. But you'd never know that if you were trying to look it up. But, like, for instance, the whole thing about a vestry member needing to be confirmed, that's only in the diocesan canons. You might have it in your bylaws in your parish. You might not, but it's definitely not a national canon. It is only in the diocesan canon. So, but we'd have no way of knowing that. So we try to put it all together to make it a little bit easier for everybody to digest, so everybody can get the information they need, and they can go into more detail if they want to from there. So what does this do to have this kind of baptismal model of vestry? Well, I think it creates a lot of trust and transparency, because it allows us to do some mutual ministry together. We recognize it's not just the role of the clergy, but all of us are working on this together. This is our work as a church, as a vestry. It gives a great opportunity for peer engagement. Vestry members, especially if you're on the same team with somebody, you get to know them a whole lot better. It's an opportunity for real leadership development. For people who are on the vestry who maybe don't feel like they have that leadership skill that I talked about earlier, and also identifying people that you can put on your teams who are not vestry members who might serve as a vestry member later on. If you know somebody who's not on vestry, but maybe they happen to be in construction, well, it'd be a perfect opportunity if you think they could be a great vestry member one day to invite them to be part of the buildings and property team as a non-vestry member. And they don't have to come to vestry meetings. They would just have to go to buildings and property meetings. But if they've got the expertise, let them contribute, let them have a little leadership development. And then maybe one day they'll be your new junior warden. It's a great opportunity for community building, especially if you really begin to think about your vestry as a small group. Everybody becomes much more invested. You're not just a warm body filling a chair, sitting there wondering, am I supposed to know more about this than I do? Feeling inadequate. You get invested if you actually have a job to do and you have a role. And you get to do some real discipleship work, some donkey fetching. There's a preacher named Tom Long who talks a lot about how the disciples go and are sent by Jesus to go and get the donkey for the Palm Sunday walk. Now, they might have been wondering, what the heck are we doing going to get a donkey? It's not incredibly exciting work to go and get donkeys sometimes, but we know now what incredibly important work that was. So don't underestimate the things that you do on vestry that may seem dry and boring. They are ministry. All that donkey fetching work that you do is an important part of the life of the church. And really the only difference between those, as I said, those sort of natural skills that you may have and spiritual gifts is conversion. It's all about perspective and how you look at it. I have one vestry member right now who he's our clerk. He also serves as our parish chancellor, and he does insurance law. It's not incredibly exciting. I mean, he loves the work that he does. He feels like he helps a lot of people. But when we had Hurricane Ida and had a huge insurance claim here at St. Paul's, we really leaned on him for a lot of support, a lot of advice, a lot of help. And he really gave us great counsel along the way. And when it's been all said and done, he said, wow, I never realized that this kind of dry work that I sometimes do could be such an important part of that I could contribute so much to the life of the church. So don't underestimate really what you have to contribute. So questions? You're muted, Cannon.
Thank you so much, Father Rob. That was so informative. I just so appreciate you sharing all of that with this group. I'm going to turn off our recording at this time.